Hello, welcome to Philosophy Roulette. This is 170, Philosophy Roulette 170, where we read and review philosophy live on air. And so, because of America and Black Lives Matter, we're taking a look at philosophy of race just race. So let's see what we got today. Let's see if anything's new in the, let's see, philosophy of race. So, pub year. Alright, let's see if there's anything new at the top of this list. Usually, there's just a bunch of things with stuff that's unclassified at the moment. But yeah, so I've taken a look at a bunch of this stuff on this first page. Usually the thing to do, it looks like. Yeah, so there's nothing new. Thing to do really here is just go a few pages back and see what we have. This is all stuff from like the first few pages, apparently, or stuff from the last like 6 months. I try to do contemporary stuff. Let's see what do we got. Book review and review. So okay, not this page, next page. It's still 2020, so. Oh, I have a paper saved from Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism. I wonder if they did a issue on race recently, because a bunch of their stuff is showing up here. But maybe that's just a hot topic in the area. I don't know. Read this paper. Review. Yeah, more of the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism. Let's see if we can get somebody else. Otherwise, I'll just do the saved one. Reparations for police killings. Let's see. Perspectives on politics. Hey, Dylan. Welcome. Yeah, it was a special issue. That's right. There we go. Book review. Selling literature, decolonial feminist critiques on the new level marketplace. Same issue though. So, is this gonna be because contemporary political theory also is having a lot of reviews. So let's see if this is another one. What we do here is we get a philosophy paper and read and discuss it. So I'm just looking for one. I just grab a random one. That's why it's Philosophy Roulette. I just grab a random philosophy paper and attempt to read it. Emphasis on attempt sometimes, because it's kind of hard to see, there's a review. I don't do reviews. So this is what I do. I just get a paper and read and review it. Oh, this is here. Let's see. Perspectives on politics. Let's see how long it is. 15 pages. I'm not doing a 15-page double column one. That's like 30 pages. Sorry, Jermaine Singleton, or whoever that was. Black, white wrongs. Critique over. Yeah, so. This contemporary political philosophy, they put out a lot of reviews recently. I don't know if that's just what they do or what it is, but let's see. What was this? Alright, you know what? I'm just going to end up going back, because this whole Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism, I'll do one more page, but I'm just going to go back to this one here, because I had grabbed that earlier. I apologize to writers in foreign languages. I speak English that poorly. Critical race aesthetics. On intersectionality, a review essay. Okay. Political theory. Comment. Newark lessons. What is that? Newark. Oh, so this is body aesthetics. Alright, so this is different. Well, the British Journal of Aesthetics, more aesthetics, but it's only 2 pages. Okay, so there's a review. Introduction, Greek, Kazakh Journal Refugees, interesting. Ethics and education. Okay, so you know what? I'm just gonna go back to this one. If you want to grab the paper alongside me, here it is did not go into the chat. Oh, cool. Thanks, Dylan. Here is the paper link for anyone out there watching, like Dylan. You can grab it there, and if you come a little later, you can always type !paper in the chat box, and it will pop back up. Okay. So. Okie dokie. So. Here we go. So this is Spectral Perceptions and Ghostly Subjectivity at the Colonial Gender Race Sex Nexus, and it's from the Journal of that special issue from the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism, but I had grabbed a few days ago because I knew it was there, so I can do this one as opposed to the others because it's all the same to me. Here we go. I am proposing a feminist border thinking where liminality of the border is a ground, a space, a borderland, to use Gloria Anzaldua's term, not just a split, not an infinite repetition of dichotomous hierarchies among desouled specters of the human. Okay. Dwelling with ghosts is not an easy matter, as there are many kinds of ghosts. Rather than discussing supernatural beings that secrete the strange, the unknown, perhaps the mark of other worlds, I wish to think about ghosts of flesh and blood. They are those whose materiality does not seem to matter, whose humanity disappears or becomes spectral under colonial perception, under violent colonial gaze that types, categorizes, declassifies, and archives. I'm interested in those desouled specters of the human that Maria Lugones mentioned in her proposal to forge a decolonial feminism, or feminism attuned to the operations of coloniality, specifically what she terms the coloniality of gender, the imposition of a modern colonial system of a dichotomous understanding of gender and sex in common to race. Alright, just as a side comment, I've read quite a few papers just recently. This is like the strongest opening paragraph I've read in a while. Just like, that one actually, this person knows how to put together a strong opening paragraph, I should say. It's just, a lot of these introductory paragraphs are just like introductory and sort of laying out the topic. This one was not like that. This one is sort of throwing down a gauntlet, more or less. Dealing with ghosts as an opening line in a philosophy paper is unusual. Okay. I suppose we're going to get very analytic very soon, or something to that effect. Philosophers can't seem to maintain it. But hey, maybe this author's better. While Lugones concentrates on coloniality's imposition of a dichotomous understanding of gender and sex in connection to racialization, here I wish to engage her notion of desouled specters of the human dominated by dichotomous hierarchies, in light of which I see as the spectral perceptual architecture of the heart of coloniality. In particular, I wish to discuss ways in which the work of colonial colonization is intimately tied with sensory practices, including visual practices as exemplified by the photographic medium. Thinking about the spectral operations of the colonial gaze at the gender-race-sex nexus, I wonder about the haunting that even those who have a disdain for the supernatural need to contend with, to respect, to dwell with. Although, yeah, if you're going to start using words like dwell, I think you're a Heideggerian, but we'll find out. These ghosts, those whose lives have been turned spectral, need to be felt, perhaps seen. But how does one see that which is not supposed to be seen in its condition of invisibility, spectrality, and imaginary being? I propose that we dwell with ghostly subjectivities by paying attention to images produced so as to carry out the spectral operation of a system of terror and violence to which many were and continue to be subjected under colonialist perceptions. I first introduced the notion of ghostly subjectivity as discussed by Lugones in her essay Boomerang Perception and the Colonizing Gaze. We will see the development of ghostly subjectivity, or the self-turned specter, in the service of colonialist practices as a result of being in between the colonizing perceptions that do not allow for the disclosure of humanity and instead turn the self into a mere image and the image of the dominant perceiver. Second, I connect Lugones' notion of ghostly subjectivity to what I refer to as the spectral operations of photography, the writing and painting with light that can be considered not the technology of coloniality, but one of its important practices, the mechanical thief of selves and souls. Such spectral perceptions are the sensory practices whose deployment allow for the making of spectral under the specters under colonialist practices. I also point to the way in which Lugones' later thinking on the coloniality of gender, or the analysis of racialized capitalist gender oppression, is also tied to processes of visuality in which she calls light and dark side. Ultimately, I point to the necessity for a decolonial feminism engaged in haunting, a methodology of making visible what is supposed to remain invisible, but that nevertheless remains in the colonial gender-race nexus through which we live, understand, and revisit gendered and racialized embodied practices. As such, this work calls for a decolonial feminist aesthesis aimed at dwelling with specters, a dwelling that entails first and foremost feeling them, but also understanding them, following their hauntings, and disclosing them. Explorations on such a decolonial aesthesis are inspired by Laura Perez's account of the ways in which Chicana have engaged spirit works in order to fight colonialization, as well as Walter Magnolo's notion of aesthesis, with a big S, that explores the ways in which perceptions of the colonized subjects can be destabilized. This decolonial feminist aesthesis, in my view, intertwined to feminist border thinking or border epistemology. Okay, so this is kind of a bit different from the normal stuff. It does seem at least continental in flavor as of right now, with the dwelling talk and the other stuff. But let's see, anything else to say here? This is just sort of setting it up. Alright, so let's see where they're going, because this is all just introductory stuff. Ghostly subjects, desouled specters of the human. In her early musings on the operation of colonialization, Maria Lugones provides an analysis of, and I apologize for saying people's names, I don't know how they're supposed to be pronounced, so I don't know if it's Lugones. Yeah, I just don't think it's Lugons. Might be. Provides an analysis of being that are caught between two perceptions that relegate them to lack of independence and lack of sociality. The status of these beings, Lugones claims, is similar to those on exile and those who are denied an identity. She describes such beings as ghostly subjectivities. Ghostly subjectivity is the result of boomerang perception, a notion that Lugones borrows from Elizabeth Spellman and interprets through Edward Said's construction of Orientalism, and that she describes as the non-reciprocal, narcissistic, colonial, racist perception that denies independence to the one seen and that constructs its objects of imagination as reflections of the white seer. As Lugones states, the white gaze imagines its object to be like and different from itself. The Western white seer is the original, the object of his gaze is a mere but distorted image. Image both in the sense of imagined and in the sense of a reflection and imitation. The imagination, wavering between fear and delight, construes us in its image, but as a terrific, dangerous, monstrous distortion of its own familiar visage, and as fulfilling its unspoken desires. In both cases, it construes us as dependent on the seer for its existence, and lacking an independent history because lacking an independent subjectivity. Okay, so we've got a sort of a one-way thing here, where just the colonized, I guess you could say, is just dependent on its own existence, which is sort of this deficient existence, as ghostly as they say, because it only exists as part of the subjectivity of the Western white seer. Alright, so it's denying because it lacks an independent subjectivity. It lacks its own sort of agency, basically, there. Lugones expands on this operation of boomerang perception as it is internalized by people of color themselves, leading to the account of the ghostly subject caught between two perceptions, the perceptions of the white dominant self and the perception of the non-dominant person of color who has internalized white perception. While the dominant white relegates the self to a non-identity, the person of color relegates them to a lack of independence. A being that does not have a home, that does not belong given that she is not accepted even by those that have been colonized. This self thus becomes a mere image in between two violent perceptions. When elaborating on this ghostly subjectivity, Lugones explains, ghostly subjectivity, is a state of estrangement from self in between two perceptions, neither one of which allows one to position and identify oneself in the world except as an image. Neither perception provides a home or a sense of belonging. One is divested of historicity, living in an uncreative limbo, used, arrogated, doomed to carry out other people's agendas. Alright, so the question is that this notion of image here is where I think we're going to go, is that it's some sort of the technology of photography or film, as I think that's where we're getting to, it takes away some sort of the humanity here. And so they're going to be arguing, again, philosophy of technology stuff. I think we're Heideggerian, I don't know. But it's looking like that's what the strategy is here, by the sort of the dominant technology, the perception, as it's understood. We are then sort of flattening out the colonized, and that's how it's hard to get a hold of yourself. You're in this limbo when you're just sort of this flat image of the dominant culture, I guess you could say. Okay. While Lugones' analysis is a directed explanation of how the colonizer's logic of divide and conquer affects marginalized racial groups and makes them distrust heterogeneity and lead them to an internalization of colonizing logic, she introduces this important notion of ghostly subjectivity in the processes of colonization that is, in my view, key to what we may think of as the spectral perceptual architecture at the heart of coloniality. The perceptual building blocks through which flesh and blood beings are turned into, following Lugones, specter, and are thus negated, abrogated, abjected, and used as fodder for the operations of empire, capitalism, and colonization. Interestingly, in Pilgrimages, Lugones does not develop this notion of ghostly subjectivity in detail and instead moves forward in theorizing an account of active subjectivity. Nevertheless, the echoes of this notion are found in her more recent work, in which she calls for a decolonial feminism that is cognizant of the operations of coloniality at the nexus of gender, race, and sex. In calling for decolonial feminism, she asks us to dwell in histories of resistance, to learn about each other, to make that crucial first step of seeing the colonial difference. Her important call is one that requires that we see the colonial difference in all its power. As she says, coloniality infiltrates every aspect of living through the circulation of power at the levels of body, labor, law, imposition of tribute, and the introduction of property and the land of disposition. Here I would like to add to this list of operations of aesthesis of perception as understood in connection to the creation of an imaginary that includes a particular perceptual, sensuous colonizing process involving the construction of particular kinds of beings, the criminal, the insane, the uncivilized, the inhuman, the animal, the ghostly. Connected to the production of this imaginary are the operations of visuality in the sense theorized by Nicholas Mirzoff. Visuality as conferring authority to the coloniality. As Mirzoff says, visuality structures authority to power and renders this association natural. It does so by a tripartite structure of power that, according to Mirzoff, 1. Classifies categories and defines, 2. Separates groups, and 3. Makes this separation seem right. This latter aspect of visuality is key, as it is what, according to Mirzoff, aesthetizes visuality, what creates aesthetics of respect for the status quo, the aesthetics of the proper of duty of what is felt to be right and hence pleasing and ultimate and even beautiful. Just side comment here. I just saw an article. I didn't read it, but it was a pop article that popped up on one of my feeds saying that the representation of police in children's sort of media, sort of like cartoons aimed at kids, is now getting like massive scrutiny because the cops are always like, it's not a realistic portrayal, of course nothing in cartoons is, but it's getting a massive attention all of a sudden how the cops are portrayed, and I think even in the blurb they called it propaganda. So it's like this sort of what makes seem right and separates groups and classifies, and how do you understand the cops? I mean, it's already embedded in the sort of the children's media, the cop as a certain sort of character and all these things. So continuing, this aesthetics of the proper is implicated in what Lugones, while critiquing and also expanding Annibale Quijano's account of the coloniality of power names the coloniality of gender, an analysis of racialized capitalist gender oppression that explains how colonization, I always get coloniality and colonizations. Got to get better at saying that word. How colonization constructs binary gender sex categories in connection to racialization. Quijano's account centers the role of racialization at the coloniality of power, capitalism, modernity nexus. Now I'm losing it. That is, his analysis exposes the link between racialization of the colonized labor and the capitalist world system in the context of the colonization of the Americas. Lugones' discussion, however, makes a crucial intervention by offering an account of how such racialization is intricately tied to gender. She thus provides a key analysis in the coloniality of power at the gender-race-sex nexus. In this analysis of how gender becomes an organizing principle after colonization, Lugones explains both a light and dark side of gender, the light side referring to white bourgeois women who are recognized as women and understood as fragile and passive, and the dark who understood as fragile and passive, and the dark side referring to the colonized bodies of color who are excluded from the description of women and are regarded as animals and are seen as aggressive and violent. For the purposes of this discussion, however, I do not concentrate on Lugones' methodology and argument in reaching an account of the coloniality of gender, but instead wish to dwell in the connection between the spectral quality of the coloniality of gender and light, not the light that describes the bourgeois females in the binary proposed by Lugones, but light, as it writes, beings out of existence in the very process of indexing through photography. It is my view that this light, which selves are turned into mere images and are made into ghostly subjects that are placed at the lower and lowest rungs of the ladder of classifications of being, constitutes a process of spectrality, or a spectral perceptual architecture at the heart of coloniality, or rather the lack of heart of coloniality. Alright, so here we finally got what the overall strategy is. So so where are we getting? All right, we're just going to keep going. Okay. While in Lugones' work, the operations of ghostliness appear in pilgrimages, in the essay discussing boomerang perception and highlight the colonial's gaze as it is internalized by people of color. These ghostly operations need to be considered within the larger framework of a decolonial feminism, a project engendered by work by Chicana feminists such as Gloria Anzaldúa, Sheila Sandoval, Emma Perez, Laura Perez, and now Maria Lugones in her response to Quijano. A recognition and a discussion of such ghostly operations within coloniality must be a part and parcel of decolonial feminism so as to disclose the manner in which colonized reality in general and the colonized reality of the gender-race-sex nexus in particular is constructed within the operations of colonial perceptual systems that is generally ocular-centric. My point here is to take up the way in which the construction of this ghostly subjectivity by way of a spectral perceptual processes of colonization aided by photographic technologies turns what is real into ghostly, what is human into specter. Indeed, Marx and Engels' well-known statement, all that is solid melts into air, applies here as all that is solid and human becomes spectral under the colonizing gaze. These spectral perceptual processes at the heart of coloniality need to be taken up by decolonial feminism that arises out of what Lugones refers to as fractured locus, in need of attunement to histories of resistance, multiplicity, and a lack of enchantment with the colonial difference and woman, read white woman, as the universal. Alright, so basically, we're looking at the photographic technology here. The concept of what is worth and how to photograph things as basically a result of colonialization, like what is the different and that, or what is the sort of the far and the alien that like lacks heart, and that is what the colonialization focuses on, or the colonization focuses on, the lack of sort of empathy of the heart of the other. Oh god, it is getting dark out. All right, hold on one second, I'm gonna turn the light on. I just saw the video. I mean, it's 11 o'clock in the morning here, and it is dark. So this is not I usually lights cause heat, and I've got multiple monitors. So, and it's getting warm here in the New York area. Okay, so I'm turning into a ghost myself. I'm like disappearing into the air, like the darkness. Okay, continuing. Spectral perceptual operations of colonization. Recognizing the power of photographic technology and enacting a specific kind of haunting within that specific context of perception, specifically the visuality of the gender, race, sex nexus, is necessary if we are going to answer Lugona's call for a decolonial feminism that retains creative ways of thinking and that is antithetical to the logic of capital and to the colonial gender difference, as John Tagg has taught us regarding the technologies of photography arising in the 19th century. They were technologies of knowledge connected to a scientifico-legal regime of power anchored in the state. In the creation of a new panoptical social order aided by photographic technologies, it is crucial to point to the role of the photograph in the creation of types and their opposites, for example, the criminal and the law-abiding citizen, the insane and the sane, the virtuous and the unvirtuous woman, the civilized and the uncivilized, the human and the animal. Crucial in these operations were so-called men of science that in fact were not just creating the racialized other, but classifying this other as less civilized, less than human. Yeah, so this term actually is, I mean, at least something I know a little teeny bit about. It used to be because like scholars were called like men of letters back in the day, and then they were trying to do the same thing to boost the concept of being a scientist. So they wanted to be men of science, like a man of letters. But actually, there was pushback from the feminists of the day and also others that that's why they just like the term scientist, because it wasn't gendered. So this was a big fight actually about what to call a scientist. So it definitely was. This is definitely right in that issue. In this regard, what is known as carte de visite. I'm sorry, I don't do French. I should probably do French. Visiting cards, first produced in Paris in 1854 by André Adolphe Eugène Desderies, and that became immensely popular in Europe and the Americas, provide a glimpse into the identity formation and negation associated with the medium of photography and the manner in which such a medium literally made particular kinds of citizens and denied humanity to dark beings from the faraway lands. It is... Oh man, yeah, and it started raining now. Okay. Where was I? No. Dark sins denied from dark beings from faraway lands. It is thus important to understand different practices of the spectral operations of coloniality, more specifically the perceptual operations of systems of power that enlist all forms of knowledge and understanding, including perceptions as such. Oh yeah, feel free to ask questions, chat, if you are listening and you have questions. I will try to answer. Knowledge and understanding, including perceptions as such, at the service of the practices of othering, whereby flesh and blood selves became disposable beings, appendages to machines, and ghostly subjects doomed to carry out other people's agendas. Yeah, so I mean, if you're going to turn people into sort of like souvenirs, is basically what it's coming to. This sort of visiting cards is like you pick up a card when you're at like some foreign place to remember the place by. So, but in some sense, by photographing the people in that way, the people themselves have become the souvenirs, which is like these junky souvenirs you get, like probably cost like 3 cents to make and like end up paying like $10 for it. Okay, continuing. Photographs writing with light are work at multiple levels of visibility and invisibility, both making their subjects overly visible, especially when dealing with black bodies. Actually, on this whole concept of souvenirs, like the sort of well, not pandemic culture at the moment, but like the